What's up, fellow music nerds? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Podcast, the only place to get your fix for country and alternative music. And we are back with another alternative episode. Really excited to talk about some of the new releases this week. But before we jump in, just want to remind everybody, if you're new, that how this works is since we are a country and alternative podcast, we are only covering one genre each week. So this week we're covering alternative. Next week, tune in and you'll get your country fix then. So one of the other things that I'm introducing is, if you were with us for country last week, you realized that we are using the Anchor platform. And so what that allows me to do is, at least for my Spotify listeners, at the end of each episode, it gives me a chance to highlight an artist and play their song in full on the podcast to kind of play us out. So stick around and see who gets that honor this week. And let's jump right in with some album reviews. So the first album that we reviewed this week that we're going to talk about is Lighting Up the Sky from Godsmack. Now, Godsmack is a band that probably wouldn't normally get covered on the podcast just because I feel like they fall more into the classic rock genre, but I felt like this album was one that I wanted to include simply because this is their last album that they are recording. Now, Godsmack has made it very clear that they are not disbanding or there's no rift between the band whatsoever. They have made it clear that they are just at the end of their 28-year journey and they will not be releasing any new music from here on out. They've talked about continuing to tour and continuing to put out greatest hits albums, but as far as new music goes, that's going to be it from them. So Lighting Up the Sky was just a very solid listen. Honestly, it's one of those albums that it definitely gives you the classic rock vibe right away. And if you're a more classic rock fan, you're going to love this album and this sound from Godsmack. So one of the things that I noticed in terms of themes on this album was it was a lot of lovesick sounds, almost like somebody's going through a divorce or a breakup, and you hear it all throughout. You hear it in What About Me, Soul on Fire, Truth, all of these different songs that kind of touch on that divorced lover that's going through and looking back on what went wrong in the relationship and what went wrong in potentially even the marriage. So there's not much that I have to say about this album. I think, like I said, this is not one that I normally would cover, but I felt like it was important to highlight it also just because of how solid it was overall. My favorite track on this album was Truth, and that was a track where Godsmack definitely slowed it down a little bit and got a little bit more in depth as to what was going on and trying to figure out, like, really what happened. Please just tell me the truth. So that song's going to be linked in the playlist, in our Control-Alt-Save playlist. And this is also one of those albums that I can see creeping into a year-end list in terms of top albums of the year, but not making it very high, or it might just be like an honorable mention. It's one that's so easy to listen all the way through because it's kind of that classic sound that you're used to in the rock genre or in the rock scene. And it's one of those that if you're kind of looking to move away from the heavy side of things, or you're kind of just looking for something kind of like an easy listen that you don't have to think too much, Godsmack's definitely a band that I see being for you. If you are not sure whether or not you want to check them out, or you don't want to dive right into a full album of them, go over and check out their song Bulletproof. That was one of the songs that got me into them as a band, so I think everybody would love that song, and I think that's a good starting point for people that have not heard Godsmack just yet. But if you are an album listener, Lighting Up the Sky by Godsmack, go check it out. I don't think you'll be disappointed, and yeah, send Godsmack off with a bang. Let's get them some listens and some streams on this album because it's definitely worth it. So Go check them out. The next album that we checked out is probably my favorite one from this week, and it's almost more of an EP, but it's called There's Nothing Worse Than Too Late from Real Friends. So Real Friends is a band that I've been familiar with for a while now, and the best way I can describe them is that they are pure pop punk bliss. This album is something that all fans of pop punk, all fans of punk or rock are going to love. There's really no way to compare their sound because they are very unique. But if I had to give them a comparison, I'd say imagine if Mayday Parade and Sum 41 had a baby. That's kind of the vibe that I get from these guys. And man, I can't express enough how much I loved listening to this album. This album from top to bottom is, honestly, it's flawless in a word. It's one of those EPs, albums that comes along and it really just kind of smacks you upside the head and says, this is the type of music that you've been wanting from all of the other bands. This is the sound that you want to hear. This is the style that you want to hear. And I just can't say enough good things about it. You know, diving deeper into this album, you get a song like Always Lose, where it's basically talking about how you're just hurting to open up because in the end, you always lose because every time you open up to this person, they more or less dismiss you and just kind of, you know, end up losing that person because you were so open and because you were so vulnerable. And I think that's something that everybody can relate to. Everybody has that hesitation to open up to a new relationship or a new person in a new relationship where you're afraid that if you open up, that might be the thing that sets it over the edge and makes that person leave. So really interesting to hear this type of a spin on a song like that, and even more amazing to hear them strip that song back and do an acoustic version at the end of this album, which is so good. And I believe I saw that they've gotten a new vocalist. I believe his name is Cody, and his vocals all throughout this are just stunning. There's a little bit of that like grit and growl that you would expect to have more of a heavier sentiment, and I definitely hear that in the lyrics, but it's also so soft sonically that it doesn't make it hard to listen to. And a lot of the songs on this EP have such a cool little nuance, and I'm wondering if that's going to be kind of their flavor moving forward or something that is unique to Real Friends, is that a lot of songs toward the end have this one acoustic line right before the chorus, or the chorus starts as an acoustic and then it brings back in all of the instrumentation, and that's something that I think works so well for bands because it helps to show off the vocalists so much more. And Real Friends does it so well in this EP. It's almost every song where you have just like one or two lines where you get that acoustic slow down and then all of a sudden it picks right back up and you're into that larger swell. So that is just perfection from them on that. And you know, I talk about all these up-tempo tracks and then getting to a slower acoustic sound, but they still slow it down on the album too and give you a slow, I don't want to say it's a ballad, but a slower song in I Don't Have to Do This Anymore. And it's just a very striking song about a breakup. You know, it's one of those that really makes you sit there and think, okay, they're kind of talking all about the different things that they don't have to do. They're talking about all of the ways that they don't have to basically be involved in this relationship anymore, that they don't want to be a part of. And that's just something that was so interesting to hear. And in I Don't Have to Do That Anymore, you get those angsty pop punk lyrics that you love. You get that I don't ever want to see your face again, sad songs on the radio. Like the whole vibe is just, it's perfect pop punk classic days. You know, it's the perfect, it kind of reminds me of If I'm Lucky by State Champs, where you get that like slow down song, but obviously the subject matter is a lot different in this case, but so impressive from Real Friends for this. And honestly, guys, this is the album that I can say without a doubt is my favorite from this genre so far this year. This is one where it's hard to make such a strong impression so quickly when you listen to a lot of music like I do, where you're constantly looking for new things, or you're constantly reviewing music, or constantly listening to things. This is an album that I really haven't been able to stop playing. This is one that I have to say to myself, all right, you need to turn this off and go review something else. And it's rare for an album to make that strong of an impact on me so early. So if that gives you any indication of how good this album is, I know you guys are going to want to go check this out. So, Real Friends, there's nothing worse than Too Late. Go check it out. Go give it a listen, and go give these guys a follow. They are going to be huge in the scene if they continue to put out music like this. Real Friends, go check them out. And the last album we reviewed this week is from Awake at Last, and it's called The Balance. Awake at Last is a relatively new band to me. I've heard of them before, but I don't remember reviewing any of their stuff in the past before I started this podcast. So I was interested to dive into a new album from them and just kind of get a feel for what they sound like and just a feel for them in general as a band. And so I actually went to their homepage and their website, and I was intrigued by one of the statements on their website. And the statement basically said that Awake at Last is a band that, as members and a band, are focused on positivity, spirituality, self-help, and making an impact every day. And it's interesting to hear a band talk about that, because obviously most bands will come out and say that in interviews or things like that, but to have such a profound, powerful statement right away on your website that's one of the first things that hits you, I thought that was kind of cool. You know, we don't see that too often where bands put themselves out there like that. And, you know, first listen through this album, I definitely got Christian rock vibes, and I know that has a lot to do with their positivity and self-help message, but I did get that vibe. And honestly, even if they were, I love it. I mean, I think it was such a good album to listen to, and such a fun album to listen to as well. You know, I think sometimes when we get these heavier bands that do promote that positive message and this, you know, self-help, they do get mislabeled as, you know, Christian or religious. And, you know, I have a story about that where when I was in college, one of the first bands that I got introduced to, kind of in the same vein as Awake at Last, was Skillet. And I went out and bought their, I can't remember what album it was. It was the one that included Feel Invincible on it that everybody was crazy about. But I had bought that album, and I was one of those people that had the CDs and then burned it into my computer so that I could add it to an iPod. And I remember loading it into iTunes. I didn't pay attention to the way iTunes categorized it. You know, I got the album artwork and all that other stuff, but one of the things that I didn't pay attention to was the genre that it classified Skillet as. I would have probably back in that day just said that they were rock and called it a day, but iTunes called them religious in their genre. And that's kind of stuck with me to this day, that, you know, sometimes iTunes even sees things in a little bit different of a light than even maybe the band does. So it was interesting to see them be considered religious in that respect. And I kind of got that vibe from Awake at Last, where I could see them falling into that category if I got this album and then had to put it into iTunes. But, like I said, it's not a bad album at all. This is a really fun album and was a really fun listen for me. I don't want to dive too far in because, like I said, these guys are still very new to me, and I try to reserve a lot of judgment for newer bands that have been around for a little bit, because obviously I'm only one album in and I don't want to kind of formulate too much of an opinion just yet. But with that being said, I still feel like it's important to talk about bands like this that, even though I'm not very familiar with, I want other people to be familiar with after listening to this album, because this is a band that I can see hanging around for a long time because they just put out such striking songs. And in my opinion, this is one of the more striking albums lyrically that I've heard in a while. This whole album is definitely centered around the self-help, self-improvement idea, and no song exemplifies that more than Landmines. Landmines was a huge standout for me because Landmines is basically talking about how every single thought is a landmine, but you're trying to get around them and get out. And that's an interesting way of saying that your mind is a minefield, really. I think that saying's been said for a while now, but to actually hear a band produce a song that talks about that is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting to hear going into this album. We have a song called Restore My Sight on this album, and I feel like Restore My Sight is one that everybody needs to listen to because this is a song where we really get that Christian rock vibe, or at least that spirituality in a song, because it's all talking about how dark it's become and how they're walking on that pier alone, and it's hard and he can't see, and please restore his sight so that he can see again and so that he can feel again. And that was just so impressive lyrically to see somebody dive into such a dark topic and do it in a way that you're trying to bring that light forward. Everybody, when they need sight, they need the light to see it first, I guess, is the way I processed it. And, once you finally see the light, your sight has been restored and nothing can stop you then. So was really impressed with that song. There is one song that I want to talk about, and I don't know if this is just because, I'm a music nerd and I'm just overhearing things, but I want you all to go check out their song, Sky to Earth. And I want you to listen to the very opening cadence, just musically. Don't listen to the lyric part. And it's basically as soon as the track starts. But go listen to that track and tell me if you hear All Time Low by John Bellion in that opening cadence. When I first heard the opening music to that song, I found myself singing the low, low, low part. And I listened back a couple times, and every time I kept singing it, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense for that to be like a comparison, but for some reason, my head was processing it that way. So go let me know if I'm crazy or if y'all can hear that too, because that's been driving me nuts since I've listened to this album. So Sky to Earth is the one to check out for that. But overall, guys, this was a really solid album, a really solid introduction for me to Awake at Last. And I'm really excited to go back and listen to. I know they have another album that they released, and I'm excited to go back and listen to that and see if I hear some of the same trends and some of the same themes in all of their songs. And same thing musically. I mean, I noticed that I think these guys are on SiriusXM Octane, which puts out a lot of heavier bands as well. Like I know Breaking Benjamin's been on there. I know a lot of the bands that we talked about before, Pierce the Veil, You Me at 6, all those guys have been on there. So we know that Awake at Last does have some heavy tendencies, at least musically, and then obviously they dive into some darker themes lyrically, but really excited to go back and check that out. I think you guys should too. So Awake at Last, The Balance, go give it a listen. That wraps up the albums for this week, but I did have a bunch of singles that I wanted to talk about, and the first one of those is Faded from a band called Happy Days. First experience with this band from the UK and a great first impression. This is definitely not going to be my last experience with these guys, and they are... The only thing that I'm going to say about Happy Days is that they are an emo punk pop sound to check out. There's not much else really to say about them at this point, but Faded is one of my favorite tracks from this week. I think you guys will love it. If you follow me on socials, I've been promoting that song in some of our posts about the playlist and on my story. So Faded by Happy Days, go give them a listen. Really excited to hear what else is coming from these guys. Next single we checked out was Loser by Hometruths. Another new band out of the UK, or at least new to me. Hometruths is another pop punk band, and their song Loser is one of those that I would say could be a modern day Teenage Dirtbag for us. You get all the perfect visuals in it, and basically he's talking about how he's such a loser, and this girl's never going to like him, and you get the backwards hat, Vans, breaking his board, so you get that skate vibe as well. So modern day Teenage Dirtbag might be on the way from Hometruths. If so, I'm real excited for it. I hope everybody else picks up on this song, because it was so cool to find a song like this and listen to it and just kind of visualize this person that Hometruths is talking about in this song. So Loser by Hometruths, go give it a listen. And the next single that we have to talk about is Parasite by Archetypes Collide. Archetypes Collide is a band that I have not reviewed on the pod before, but I have reviewed myself. It is a band that I am super high on and that I'm super excited to hear their debut album. And normally with bands, I don't get too excited over the first couple of singles just because I tend to try and wait until I get a larger collection of songs. But for some reason with Archetypes Collide, they're a band that I just have a lot of faith in. They're a band that I can hear big things coming from these guys. And my first introduction to them was What If I Fall? And that song has just been on repeat all year for me. But Archetypes Collide releases this new track, Parasite, and this is another stunner of a track. It's fantastic vocally, and this, like I said, this is a band that I have so much faith in and so much... My expectations are high for these guys, and they haven't disappointed so far. You know, Parasite is that heavy, hard-hitting track that I was kind of expecting when I heard the vocals on What If I Fall, so I'm glad that we got a more up-tempo, heavy-hitting song before the album comes out. And, you know, I keep preaching how much faith I have in this band, and to prove that to you guys, I've already reached out and grabbed some merch from these guys. I've already ordered some stuff prior to the album release. I'm excited to get this album and just really listen to what they have to say. I think these guys are headed for very big things. I know I've been kind of repeating myself on these guys, but that should just tell you how passionate I am about Archetypes Collide being the next big thing. So Parasite by Archetypes Collide, go check it out. The next song that we checked out was The Credits by Arrows in Action, Loveless, and Magnolia Park. So 2 for 2 on Magnolia Park being featured on the podcast so far, and this song is a heavy collaboration in terms of the names on this track. And overall, it's just a really fun song. It's a neat twist on a guy going through a breakup. Basically, like, he doesn't want the show to end, so the credits are going to continue to roll. And that's, again, where he gets into his head about trying to figure out if there's something he could do to slow the credits down and basically not play his own part in this movie. So, not much more to say about this track. I think you guys will like it. It's definitely one of my favorites this week. I love the triple threat here. So, the credits by Arrows in Action, Loveless, and Magnolia Park. Go check it out. Next song I want to touch on is Slowly Healing from AOTY. Now, I don't have much to say about this track from AOTY, but I do want to touch on this artist simply because we all know that he kind of started out in the TikTok realm, and I feel like there's a lot of pressure on artists like AOTY and Jaden and Nessa Barrett to really break out of that TikTok mold. I feel like a lot of times other people discount these artists as, oh, they're just TikTokers. This is just a TikTok song. That's really all they're going for. And that's not true at all. Jaden's actually become one of my favorite artists in the alternative scene. And I'm excited to hear more from all of these artists. And a song like Slowly Healing from AOTY is really a great example of how this isn't a TikTok song. This isn't a song that I see getting used in a sound a lot. You know, this is a song where I see AOTY kind of being a little vulnerable on this and telling us how he's trying to heal, and it's a very slow process from the girl that he used to love. And, you know, I'm hoping that as these artists continue to grow and put out more music and put out more albums and singles and things like that, I hope that people do realize that this is not just an attempt to stay relevant. I think this is something that a lot of these artists are passionate about. And I think it's something that we need to consider as a viable source of discovering new music and discovering new talent. You know, it's not going to be like in the past where we were able to turn on the radio and hear, oh, this is the new band, and we're not going to turn on the radio and hear an artist like Jaden or a band like Archetypes Collide unless we're listening on the XM radio platform, and even then they may not get played on there. So sometimes we have to look to different areas for our music discovery, and so TikTok's a very viable source for that. So Slowly Healing by AOTY, go check it out. I think everybody will like it, and give some of these TikTok artists a chance. I don't think they can be considered TikTok artists anymore. I think they just need to be considered artists. The next track that we checked out was Are You Impressed from Honey Revenge. To be a little corny, yes, I am impressed with Honey Revenge. This song is incredible. I love the sound, and this was a song that I don't know if I clicked on it initially to listen to it, to review it, or if this was one that popped up after I was done listening to another album or another song that I was reviewing. I think it might have been a song that just kind of popped up after I was reviewing another one. And when I was listening, I was like, I didn't know that Against the Current dropped a new song, and that's the vibe that I got immediately. And then I looked down and saw that it was a new band, or a new band to me at least. And Honey Revenge is, wow. I mean, what else can you say about this artist other than it's one that gives you such a mainstream mid-2000s pop punk vibe? And this is one that I can see playing on mainstream radio, even mainstream pop radio, because it has just that infectious melody and those catchy lyrics that people are going to get this track and not stop playing it. They're not going to be able to stop singing it. So if you haven't heard it yet, Are You Impressed by Honey Revenge? Go check it out. That wraps it up for the music review this week. I only have two things that I want to touch on in the news. First thing being, good old Travis Barker. I swear, the guy just, he just goes so hard. And I touched on this on the first podcast about him busting his finger and being back out there the next day. And sure enough, Travis busted it again. to the point where now he needs surgery. I think as of recording this, he was in surgery or soon to be out of surgery, but knowing Travis, he'll be fine. Give him a couple days to heal up, and he'll be ready to go again. So, wanted to touch on that piece. And then the big tour announcement that I do not believe that I touched on my last one was Yellowcard is going on tour to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Ocean Avenue, and they got support from Mayday Parade, Story of the Year, Anne Berlin, and This Wild Life. So if you guys have not got your tickets for this one yet, go get them. I know they're selling out fast. I definitely got mine already. Can't wait to go check these bands out in person. Yellowcard's a band that I have not been able to see live yet, so I'm really excited to catch them on this tour. And that just about wraps it up for us this week on the Matrix Music Review podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we will be back next week with a country episode. And before we go, we got to give our highlighted artist a chance to shine. And if you are not listening on Spotify as a premium user, I do apologize, but go check them out on the playlist that's going to be linked below. Give us a follow on all the socials at Matrix Music Review, and we'll see you next time. Until then, highlighted artist of the week playing us out, Hometruths with their song Loser.